Hello and a very warm welcome to this afternoon's webinar. My name is Philip Hoddell and I'm the chairman here at Burkitt Long. I'm delighted to have so many people attending today. As you may know, Burkitt Long run a series of Wednesday webinars on a variety of legal topics. In early December, we have two webinars focusing on special educational needs in schools, followed by one on Burkitt Long's commitment to people, commitment to the environment and commitment to our communities and how that commitment can benefit our clients. If any of these interest you, please do reserve your place at www.burkittlong.co.uk/events. Now today's webinar is entitled Trust Registration, Duties and Responsibilities of Trustees and will be presented by Sarah Ryder, a solicitor from our private client department. Sarah will take you through the new law, explain how it all works, and of course take questions at the end. So without further ado, I will hand you over to her for what promises to be a fascinating presentation.
Thank you very much, Philip. So as Philip said, my name's Sarah Ryder and I'm a solicitor in the Agriculture and Estates team here and I do private client work. So we've got quite a lot to talk about today. There is an agenda. There's not much time and a lot to fit in. So it will be a bit of a whistle-stop tour, but I can take questions at the end. So please do use the question and answer facility. And if I haven't got time to deal with the questions at the end, then I will deal with them after the webinar and get back to you if I can. So first of all, then we're going to run through these points today. First one is, what is the Trust Registration Service, which I'll refer to as the TRS throughout the webinar. The new rules, there are some new rules, as you'll know, so we're going to briefly talk about the new rules and which trusts need registering. We're going to talk about the exclusions, those trusts which don't need registering, trustee responsibilities and what the trustees are obliged to do in relation to registration of trusts, the deadlines and the consequences of non-compliance. And then I've got a few slides at the end which concentrate on farmland and farming partnerships, because farming partnerships, well, partnerships generically, but in particular farming partnerships who hold land are particularly affected by the new TRS rules. So first of all then, what is the TRS? The Trust Registration Service was set up in 2017 and it was part of an EU anti-money laundering directive, and it's a register of beneficial ownership of assets within a trust. And when it was set up in 2017, it required all express trusts that were liable to pay UK tax to register. So that was in 2017, but recently there has been some updates and some new regulations in relation to registration of trusts. So what are the new rules? So the new rules came into force in October 2020. They are far more wide-reaching than the 2017 rules. They're part of the 5th Money Laundering Directive, and again they're looking to tighten up the rules on trust to prevent money laundering activities, because trusts and trust structures are an easy way to hide ownership of assets, and so they are often used for money laundering and financing of terrorism. So the new rules, as I said, are aimed at making it harder for money laundering to happen via trusts. And the requirements now that are that almost all UK trusts, and indeed some non-UK trusts, which were in existence on or after the 6th of October 2020, including those which are not liable for tax. So there's a difference there, because previously it was just taxable trusts that needed to be registered, even if they are now closed. Unless they're specifically excluded. So that does mean that even if a trust doesn't exist anymore, if it was open on the 6th of October 2020, if it existed at that date, even if it was not liable for tax, and it doesn't fall within one of the exemptions, then it needs to be registered. Also, complex estates will need registering, but that's something that perhaps you should, if you come across that, you will need to speak to your probate practitioners about, and I'm not going to really cover that in any great detail in this webinar. So I've mentioned that there's some exclusions. So looking now at the exclusions, some trusts are set up for very specific purposes, and their nature is such that they're very unlikely to be used for money laundering or financing of terrorism. And so these trusts are excluded from registration. There's a fairly long list of exclusions, and the Trust Registration Service has published this list. But it does include the following. This is not an exhaustive list, but I'll just run through some of the most common exclusions. Will trusts which were closed within 2 years from the date of death. So if a trust was set up by way of a will and it was created on the date of death, there is 2 years, a 2-year period thereafter in which it does not need to be registered. After that it will. Personal injury trusts don't need to be registered, charitable trusts, trusts for disabled persons and child bank accounts, pilot trusts, and this used to be quite a common way of setting up trusts in readiness for their use in the future. So pilot trusts that was set up pre the 6th of October 2020 but contained under £100. Trust imposed by legislation, so that's by the law, often found in things like intestacy. Trust for bereaved minors, and some co-ownership trusts. So I'm going to discuss in a little bit more detail later on co-ownership trusts. As I said, this is not an exhaustive list. There are many other exemptions, and if you're uncertain about whether a trust that you hold is exempt or needs registering, then you should either check the list of exemptions or seek advice, and we can obviously help with that. So trustee responsibilities then. So it's the trustee's responsibility to ensure that trusts which should be registered are duly registered. And in order to register a trust, the trustees, and there's usually more than one trustee, need to appoint a lead trustee. Now that lead trustee can register the trust themselves, or they can appoint an agent, often an accountant or a solicitor. So again, we can help with registering trusts. We often set up trusts for our clients, so if we're familiar with the trust, then it might be worthwhile coming to us for registering those trusts. You need to register the trust using a fair amount of detail, including detail about the settlor, the beneficiaries of the trust and the assets held in the trust. The lead trustee will need to update the trust registration service periodically. So if there's any changes to the trust, these need to be updated. If the beneficiaries change, if the trust assets change, anything like that, then this needs to be updated. The information on the trust register should be accurate. For exempt trusts, it's important to consider whether any changes cause exemptions to be lost. So if a trust has not been registered because it falls within an exemption and there is a change to that trust, for example, a will trust has not been registered because the 2-year period hasn't expired yet, and then the 2-year period expires, then that trust will then need registering. Or if one of the exemptions is to do with co-ownership trust, which, as I said, I will speak a little bit more about in a moment, and a beneficiary or a legal owner or trustee changes, that may cause the exemption to be lost. So it's important every time a change happens to the trust to consider whether that means an exempt trust then needs registering. And for trusts, although it says here for registered trust, it should be for registered and unregistered trust, you should consider whether any changes cause the trust to become taxable. Because if a trust becomes taxable, then it will need registering as a taxable trust. So even if a trust is already registered, if it's not taxable, and it becomes taxable, then there are additional details required, and you will need to register it as a taxable trust and get a unique tax number, so UTM. And one last thing that I wanted to mention here was data requests. So data requests can be made from certain third parties for information from the trust register. And that should be borne in mind because there's a lot of information that trustees will need to put on the register, and data requests can be made so that that information becomes available to other people. But you should be reassured because the data request needs to fall within a specific disclosure procedure, and it can only be made if there is a legitimate reason by, for example, a law enforcement agency who are investigating money laundering. Okay, so moving on then to deadlines and non-compliance. Non-taxable trusts in existence on or after the 6th of October need registering, as I've said, and they should have been registered by the 1st of September 2020, even if they were closed on that date. Sorry, that should say 2022, apologies. Even if they were closed on that date, so that's an error there, apologies there. So as I said, it could be that you are actually registering a trust which was in existence on the 6th of October 2020, but on the 1st of September wasn't in existence or isn't in existence now, but still needs registering, which seems a little ridiculous, but it is the case that that has to be done, I'm afraid. So if you have a trust that needs registering, then you should register it now. However, there was an allowance made for trusts set up within 90 days before that deadline of the 1st September 2022. So if they were set up 90 days before the 1st September 2022, then they had 90 days thereafter to be registered. So if a trust was created on the 31st of August 2022, apologies, there's another error there, then we're now coming up to the deadline, the 90-day deadline for registration. So in essence, I think what the takeaway here is that if you've got a trust, it needs to be registered sooner rather than later. All other non-taxable trusts need to be registered within 90 days of creation. So if the trust is set up now, or you create a trust in the future, then you have 90 days to register it, just the same as if a change happens to an existing trust that you've already registered. Again, you have 90 days to update the change. Taxable trust deadlines vary depending on whether they were when they were created and when they become liable for tax. And if you have taxable trusts, then you may have the assistance of your accountant in dealing with registration. But if you don't, and you don't know whether your taxable trust needs registering or when it needs registering, then please do let us know, and we can help you with that. So compliance and the consequences for non-compliance. Currently, the Trust Registration Service have taken a fairly light touch approach to any penalties. They recognise the huge scope of the new rules, and many trustees will not even have appreciated that there was a deadline, or in fact they had trusts that were registrable. And so for that reason, at the moment, the HMRC is sending out fairly gentle reminder letters to trustees if they come across trusts that they believe should be registered. And the only currently, the only time that penalties are likely to be applied are for continued failure to register following prompt letters and repeated warnings, or for providing deliberately inaccurate information. But that could change at any time. It's not going to be, the light touch is not going to be there forever, and penalties of up to £5,000 per offence can be issued. So it is something that needs to be dealt with if you do have a trust. Okay, so I'm just going to move on now to partnerships. As I said at the beginning when I was running through the agenda, partnerships are particularly affected by trust registration. And being an agricultural lawyer, most of my clients have farming partnerships, but partnerships generically are affected. So regarding farming partnerships, farming families often hold property, particularly land, in a certain way, and that might be the result of concerns over control and management, or a result of a structure set up to assist with succession planning or mitigation of tax. And often these structures are not reviewed or revised very often. As partnerships are not legal entities in their own rights, they can't hold assets, and therefore legal title of property, often land for farming partnerships, but for other partnerships it could be assets, is often held by one or more partners who allow the partnership to use that property or land. And there are often declarations of trust to set out the beneficial ownership of the property or the asset, the land, or partnership agreements confirming the ownership position. And these structures, this setup, whilst it's not referred to as such, is actually a type of trust, and it's called a co-ownership trust. So co-ownership trusts are caught by the rules, except in certain circumstances, and as such farming partnerships are particularly likely to be affected, because quite often farming partnerships hold land as in co-ownership trusts, often without realising it. So arrangements caught with regards to land are things like land being held by an individual for the benefit of themselves or another, land held by an individual for the benefit of others but not themselves, and land held as partnership asset by some but not all of the partners. And if you don't have a farming partnership but you are a partner in a partnership, then you can just substitute their assets instead of land, and often partnerships hold assets in the same way. So something to bear in mind. So there are exemptions. So co-ownership trusts need to be registered. The ones we've just been through need to be registered unless they are one of the exemptions. And now, broadly speaking, the exemption is that if the legal owners, that's the person who is on the land title or the or owns the asset, is the same as the beneficial owners, then there isn't a trust that needs registering, but that's quite often not the case. So exemptions then, legal owners hold the land or property for the benefit of themselves only. So there you can see that the legal and the beneficial owners will be the same. Or the legal owners hold for the beneficiaries, one or more of whom is a minor. Or the reason that the legal and beneficial owners are different is because that there are more than 4 legal owners and only 4 owners can be entered onto the title, and that's a land registry rule. So that, in fact, that exemption in fact is because there's a statutory trust there, because you simply can't have more than 4 legal owners. So if you've got 5 partners and all the partners want to be the legal owners as well, then they can't. So only 4 could be legal owners and there'll be 5 beneficial owners. But so that would be an exemption simply because you couldn't avoid a trust in that situation. And also property or other assets are purchased by one of the partners using only partnership monies, and there's no written declaration of trust. And this is an exemption that's recently been confirmed by HMRC. They have said that, and it's because of some existing law, which I won't go into, but if property is bought by one partner and they only use partnership monies to purchase it, then there is no trust, even if the partnership uses that partnership asset. But there shouldn't be a declaration of trust. The problem with this is that there quite often is a declaration of trust or a partnership agreement which acts as a declaration of trust, and the partnership agreement will probably say that that asset is to be held for the benefit of the other partners, and that then means that this exemption won't apply. Okay, so next slide then, future considerations for for farming partnerships. So it's important then, there's going to be lots of trusts within farming partnerships that are not obviously recognisable as trusts, but nevertheless are trusts and will need registering. And it's important then that partners review the structure of their land in the first instance, how it's held, and identify whether or not there are any trusts to register. And such trusts will need to be registered in accordance with the rules that we've already discussed. And any changes in the trust details will need to be updated within the 90-day period, as we've already mentioned. So that's the first thing that will need to be done. If you're uncertain about whether your trust needs registering, then there is a lot of uncertainty at the moment, particularly for partnerships, and our advice would be register the trust. There's no harm in it. So there's lots of partnerships that will be affected by the new rules, and various trust structures will be registrable, but not obviously registrable. So if you're not sure, register it. Be mindful of changes, and I've already discussed this in a little bit already. Update the register, update registered trusts, or consider whether previously exempt trusts now become registrable and need registering every time something changed within the partnership. And this happens a lot in farming partnerships and other partnerships. You know, partners leave, new partners join the partnership, assets are sold, land split. And every time that happens, you need to be mindful of whether or not that causes a change to a trust, which you need to update, or whether it causes an exempt trust to become a registrable trust. I think also it's important that in the future, partnerships can bear in mind trust registration when they're thinking about purchases and trust structureship. Sorry, trust structure. Oh, that's a bit of a tongue twister. The structure of trusts of partnerships. So if you're going to purchase land in the future, you need to just bear in mind, keep in the back of your mind, that you might need to think about whether it's going to cause a trust that needs to be registered. Is there any way to avoid that trust being registered? Should you avoid it being registered? Sometimes it's just not necessary. It's better to have the trust set up as you want it set up than to try and set it up in a different way to avoid registration. But it's just something to bear in mind. And lastly, I think use the new rules as an opportunity to review partnership structure with fresh eyes. I think that farming partnerships particularly, but a lot of other partnerships as well, don't often review how they are set up, and it's a good opportunity every time there's a change in law and you need to consider something new within your partnership, to consider whether or not you need any changes to your structure. There is another layer of complexity now to partnership land purchases and administration, but if you view it as an opportunity, then it might mean that you can make changes that might benefit your partnership in the future. So if you've got any trusts that you're not sure about, you don't know whether you need to register them, you don't even know if you have a trust, but you think there might be something that needs to be looked at, then please do get in touch, because we can help. And if it's a farming partnership, then the agricultural and estates team can help, but there are other teams who can help with different types of partnership of trusts as well. Okay. So before I take any questions, I just wanted to mention that we'll be sending out a recording to everyone that's signed up tomorrow morning. Also will include this this link to a short feedback survey, and I'd really appreciate it if you could complete that so that we can make sure that we tailor any future webinars to you and make sure they're helpful. Also, as Philip mentioned at the beginning, this is just one of a series of Wednesday webinars, and Philip also mentioned that our next one is about commitment to people, environment and communities and how that benefits clients, and that's on the 14th of December. So if you're interested, please visit our website, so it's birketlong.co.uk/events, or our Eventbrite page, and you can sign up there to the next week's webinar or future webinars. So that's it from me. If anyone has any questions, and I'd be happy to take them.
Thank you, Sarah. We have had some questions. The first question is from Paul, who asks, if the trust is invested entirely in quoted securities, would a change to any of these securities require an update to TRS?
Thank you, Paul. So we have a team here who deal with financial investments. It's not my team or my speciality, but I would say that it's likely that if it's a registrable trust and doesn't fall within the exemptions, then any changes would need to be updated. But I would advise that I put you in touch with the financial advice team here, and they can advise you on that trust.
Thank you, Sarah. We have another question from somebody anonymous, and they've asked, if a trust has an HMRC UTR, i.e. registered for and paying UK tax, is it required to register?
So if you've already registered your trust because it's a taxable trust, then it's already registered. But what you will need to do is check to see whether or not there's any additional information that's required, because the new rules do require information about the settlor, the beneficiaries and the assets, which weren't required previously. So it will already be registered, and you will have, and you've got your tax, your UTR, sorry, your UTN. So you don't need to register it per se, but you do need to check that you've got all the details that you need to provide to the trust registration scheme are on the register.
Thank you, Sarah. We do have two questions that were submitted in advance. If anybody else has any questions, please do put them in the Q&A. We have some time left. So the first question submitted in advance was, what information do we need to give TRS to register a trust?
So there's quite a lot of information that's needed that wasn't needed previously when taxable trusts were registered. I've alluded to some of it already. They require details of the settlor and the beneficiaries, including their national insurance numbers, dates of birth, addresses, nationality. So it's quite detailed. Also, they need information about the trust. So when the trust was set up, what type of trust it is, what the assets are, the value of the assets, the type of assets, so whether it's land or money. And so there's quite a lot of information to get together before you can register your trust. It's not difficult information to find, but there is quite a lot of it. So there is within the guidance, there is a list of the information you'll require, but we can also help by sending you out a questionnaire which helps you collate the information you need, and then we can help with the registration using that questionnaire.
Thank you, Sarah. And the next question is, for partnerships, is it better not to have a partnership agreement to avoid the need to register a trust?
In a word, no. The last exemption, you might recall from the slide, but the last exemption in relation to partnerships was that if a partner purchased an asset or land or property solely with partnership funds, it would automatically be for the benefit of the other partners and the partnership as a whole, but wouldn't be a registrable trust if there was no declaration of trust. And the partnership agreement is effectively a trust deed in that respect, and so having a partnership agreement would mean that you would have to register that trust. So it's tempting, I think, to think, well, if we don't have a partnership agreement, we can avoid the need to register that trust. I think this is short-sighted. There's a lot of reasons why you would have a partnership agreement, and I think that it sets out ownership of assets, how the trust runs, lots of details about how a trust will work. And if you don't have a trust document solely to avoid registration of a registrable trust, it's likely to lead to much greater financial implications and confusion for the partnership in the future, and than the cost of registering the trust would. So I think it's probably better to just register the trust, unless there's a good reason why you don't need a partnership agreement anyway.
Thank you, Sarah. That's all the questions for today. So I'll hand back to you to close.
Thank you, Zil. Thank you for joining us. Thank you for joining us today. I think I've answered all the questions that we've had, but if you've got any questions, if you go away and think of any more questions, then please do contact us. And my contact details are on the screen. I'll be happy to help you. Equally, if you want some advice regarding your trust, whether it's registrable or you want us to help you register the trust, then please do get in touch. So other than that, thank you and have a good evening.